Hello and welcome to the Caudill Book Talk. I am going to be talking about the 20 books on the Caudill list for this year. So I'm guessing it'll take approximately 30 minutes. So if you want to listen to just part of it now and part of it later, that's fine with me. So I'm going to get started. The first book, and I'm doing these in no particular order. The first book is Me, Frida, and the Secret of the Peacock Ring. In this book, Paloma is our main character. Paloma's father, who is deceased, is from Mexico City. Paloma has never been to Mexico City, and she doesn't speak English. So if I was seeing you all in person right now, I'd ask for a show of hands for how many of you have ever gone to another country where you don't speak the language. It's a little intimidating, and that's how Paloma's feeling. Fortunately, right away when she arrives, she meets two siblings, brother and sister, and they immediately have a mystery for her that they want her to help them solve. She also meets Tavo, who becomes a little bit of a love interest, if you like that in your book. In the title, Me refers to Paloma. Frida refers to Frida Kahlo, the artist. So if you don't know anything about her, this is a great book to get a little bit of insight into her. And then The Secret of the Peacock Ring, that is what the siblings that Paloma meets, that's the mystery that they want her to help them solve. Next up, I have Stormy Seas, Stories of Young Boat Refugees. This is a nonfiction book. So these are true stories, 5 different individuals who have left their countries, Germany, Vietnam, Cuba, Afghanistan, and Africa for different reasons of persecution and just not being able to have a successful life there. And so they have all come over in boats. The thing I liked about this book was it's very readable. It's very readable nonfiction. And there's a lot of pictures. In this case, this is Jose coming from Cuba, and it shows pictures of where he's come from. The other thing it has is it's got the answer to what happened to Jose. So you find out these aren't necessarily real recent stories, and so then you can find out what happened once they came to this country and what they were able to do to survive here. So that's a nonfiction book. Next up is another fiction book. This is realistic fiction, Front Desk. So our main character in this book is Mia. She's 10 years old, and she manages the front desk, hence the title of a motel for her parents. Now you might think 10 years old, but again, in referring back to our first book where Paloma didn't know the language, Mia is better equipped language-wise to handle the front desk than her parents, who are running the motel for the owner. So this is semi-autobiographical. Our author, Kelly Yang, immigrated to the United States from China. And so a lot of this is based on things that happened in her life. In the story, Mia and her parents want to help other immigrants coming to the country, but they can't let the owner of the motel know that. So there's some secrecy going on there. So that's Front Desk. Next up is Speechless. So you can tell from the cover of this book, there's a young man in front of a podium, and then the bubble above him has the title of the book, which is Speechless. So again, if I was with you in person, I would say how many of you have had to speak in front of a big group, and how many of you have felt speechless, not to mention nervous and scared. So what has happened in this book, our main character is Jimmy, and his cousin has just passed away. And his parents ask him to do the eulogy. If you're not familiar with what a eulogy is, it's a talk that's given at someone's funeral, kind of recapping their life and talking about different things that they've accomplished and maybe some funny stories and things of that nature. Well, Jimmy's got some problems. Jimmy didn't really like his cousin. Whenever he was with his cousin, bad things seemed to happen. he doesn't really want to talk in front of a crowd. A lot of us don't want to speak in front of crowds. So he's nervous already about those two things. And of course, then you have to throw in the ill-fitting clothes. His clothes just are not. He's supposed to wear a suit, and it's just not comfortable for him. So this is a realistic fiction book, something that you could possibly be asked to do someday as well. Speechless. Next up is Spirit Hunters. Spirit Hunters is a fantasy with a little bit of mystery thrown in. So my question to you would be, do you believe in ghosts? Because our main character in this book is Harper, and Harper she doesn't really know what they are. They're not really daydreams. She doesn't know if they're visions. She's not really sure what they are. But when she and her family, including her younger brother, move to a new house, some really interesting things start happening. And she really feels like she can communicate with people who have passed away. But then it really kind of ramps up in a sinister way when Michael, her younger brother, seems to really have a personality change. Normally he's pretty happy-go-lucky, and he's having temper tantrums, and he's acting out, and nobody really knows what's going on except Harper. And she thinks just possibly there's an unsettled ghost who is using her brother to find some closure. So a little bit scary, not super scary, but there's definitely scary parts to this if that's what you like. So a mystery fantasy. Next up is New Kid by Jerry Craft. I'm hoping some of you may have heard of this. This was chosen as the Newbery Award winner. If you're not familiar with that award, it is the book every year that a committee decides the very best book of all published for children. So this is the one that won last year. And this is a graphic novel. Again, if you're not familiar with a graphic novel, it's told in picture and word form, kind of like a comic book. So it's a little bit of a quicker read, usually. In this book, our main character is Jordan. He's in 7th grade, and he loves art. Art is everything to him. And if you are passionate about one thing, you might relate to him. But unfortunately, his parents do not send him to the art school that he wants to go to. Instead, they choose a school that's known for its academics. So Jordan is not too happy going to this new school. He's one of the few kids of color going to this school. And if any of you have gone to a new school, you know some of the trials of starting that. So that's New Kid. Next, I have a young adult book. So the young adult books are a little bit of a higher level. This is a biography called Becoming Kareem, Growing Up on and Off the Court. So if you are not a basketball fan, you may not know about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He was not born with that name. He was born Louis Alcindor. He was an only child, and his father had the same name, and so he went by Lou. But throughout the course of his life, he started questioning things, as a lot of people do. If any of you know any 2-year-olds, they always ask, why? And that's how they're finding out about their world. And that's what a lot of us do as we get older and even throughout our lives. We question things, and that's what Lou does as he grows up and experiences new things, and he questions things, and there's certain things that he's not as happy with in his life. And as a young man, he converts to Islam, and at that same time, or a little bit later, he decides he also wants to change his name to fully embrace his new religion. So he changes his name from Louis Alcindor to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, which means noble servant of God. So if you like biographies and learning about people's lives, this would be a good book for you. The nice thing too is he includes some pictures from his life, growing up, in school, and his growth. He's a very tall man, and then eventually when he starts playing basketball and becomes very successful. So that's Becoming Kareem. Next, I have A Good Kind of Trouble. Is there a good kind of trouble? That is the question, one of the questions that this book asks. So our main character in this book is Shayla. She's an African-American girl, and she doesn't like to cause trouble. She doesn't like trouble. She pretty much toes the line. But her older sister is not quite the same as her. As many of you could probably relate, siblings are not always the same. And she becomes very involved in Black Lives Matter. And Shayla is kind of torn. Does she help out her sister and create what her sister considers a good kind of trouble, bringing attention to a situation? Or does she stay in her comfortable zone of not causing any trouble? Well, she does decide to wear an armband that is not allowed at her school. And so then the story kind of progresses from there. So this would be a realistic fiction book. Next is Resistance by Jennifer Nielsen. Some of you may have heard Jennifer Nielsen's name before. She's written quite a few other books, including The False Prince. That's book number 1 in the Ascendant series. This book is historical fiction. It's the time of World War II. That's when it takes place, around 1942. And our main character is a Jewish girl who lives in Poland, and the Nazis have taken all of the Jewish people in Poland and put them in concentration camps. This is not an easy time for them. It's not an easy time for anyone. And so she becomes a courier. So she brings food and she brings documents to some of the people in the concentration camp. And it's extremely dangerous. So just a forewarning, this is a very intense book. People die in this book. There's violence. It's not a happy topic, but it does give a lot of insight into these kind of unsung heroes who had to get food to people, documents to people, literally saving their lives. So that's Resistance by Jennifer Nielsen. Next, I have The Parker Inheritance by Varian Johnson. This is also a realistic fiction book with a little mystery thrown in. So our main character is Candace, and Candace has moved to her grandmother's house, and it's one of those things where she starts digging around in the attic and finding some things out that nobody really wants to talk about. And there's all kinds of puzzles and clues, and she has to try to figure things out that happened in the past with what's happening now. And it alternates back and forth. And I like to mention that because some people don't care for that and some people really like it. It's not too hard to figure out what they're talking about. I don't know if you can tell from the spine here, but they have darker pages and then lighter pages. I don't know if that's really going to show up on camera, but and that will help you tell when they're switching back from time period. So if you like mysteries and different clues and trying to figure out, wait a minute, how's this all going to turn out, you might like The Parker Inheritance. All right, so in case you don't want to stay with us the whole time, we're about halfway. That was the first 10 books. So I'm going to go right ahead with the next 10 books, and if you stay with us, great. If you come back later, that's fine too. The next book is called Night Books, and this is by J.A. White. This is a fantasy, and I'd like to ask you, kind of as a teaser question, what is something that you're really passionate about? It could be like a food that you really like, or a movie that you really like. So my example would be popcorn popping. I love that smell. I love eating popcorn. It's just it's like a fun thing for me. So I'm drawn to that. So what happens in this book is Alex is our main character, and there's a couple things that he's really drawn to. One of them is pumpkin pie. It's his favorite dessert, and the other is his favorite movie. He likes horror films. So he gets up kind of in the middle of the night. He lives in an apartment, and there's an apartment door open, and he listens, and he thinks, I think that's my favorite movie playing. So he's curious. So he goes closer to the apartment. He has no idea who lives in this apartment. Then as he gets closer, he smells pumpkin pie. Well, this is too much for him to resist. So he kind of peeks in, and there's an older woman in there, and she says, come on in. And he comes in, and she's like, do you like this movie? He's like, it's my favorite movie. And you know what's going to happen, right? Before too long, that door is shut and locked, and there's no movie, and there's no pumpkin pie, and Alex, has been trapped by a witch. He is now trapped in her apartment, and one of the things he has to do is tell stories. He has to come up with a new story to tell the apartment, because to make it even stranger, the apartment is kind of like a character in the book. So it's kind of odd. Fortunately, he runs into another girl who's also been captured by this witch, and together they have to figure out what the heck to do to get away from her. So a little bit scary, not super scary, but fantasy mystery. All right, next is Amal Unbound. This book takes us to another place. I know a lot of people like to experience another culture or another land in the books they read, and this would be a good book for you if you like that. Amal is 12. She lives in Pakistan, and she has a pretty good life. It's not perfect, but it's working out okay for her until she makes a fatal mistake. She goes into town to the market to pick up some food, and while she's there, she gets hit by a car. And it doesn't hurt her badly, it just kind of knocks her over. All her groceries go tumbling, and she's obviously not happy about this. And she's gets herself up, dusts herself off, makes sure she's okay, and she's gathering all her groceries back together in her bag. And then the man in the car gets out, and he does not apologize, which makes her a little bit more angry. And on top of that, one of the things she's purchased is a pomegranate, which is a kind of a big reddish colored fruit. And he says, my mother loves pomegranates. Could I have that? And she says, no, it is not for sale, because it's in fact the last one that was available. So she picks up her things and she goes back home, and she thinks nothing more about it until later in the week that same man appears at her door, and it just so happens that he's a very powerful man in her village, and he has the ability to make Amal a servant in her home. This is extremely distressing, not only to her, but to her family, and this really transports you into a different time and place. Amal Unbound. Next is Nowhere Boy. Amal Unbound took us to Pakistan, and Nowhere Boy takes us to Belgium. Our main character in this book is Max. Max is American, and he is brought to Belgium by his parents because of their jobs. He's not too happy about this. He has to change schools. And again, like our very first book, if you remember back to Paloma in Me, Frida, and the Mystery of the Peacock Ring, she doesn't speak the language. He doesn't speak the language. His parents think it'll be a great opportunity for him to learn the language, but he's not so sure about all this. Meanwhile, so we've got Max. The other story within the story is Ahmed. Ahmed, similar to our other book, Stormy Seas, where people are leaving their countries because of persecution, that's Ahmed's story as well. He is leaving Syria because life there is very, very hard. So he and his father are coming over to Belgium, and they get separated. And now Ahmed is not only in a new country, but he's alone. So what happens is he discovers a room in Max's basement that Max's family really has no reason to go into, so it's a perfect place for him to live. So it's kind of like a thriller, because you know what's going to happen. You pretty much know that Max and Ahmed are going to meet at some time, but how they meet and everything that happens creates the basis of this book, Nowhere Boy. My next book is another nonfiction book, and it's also a young adult book. This book is called 12 Days in May, Freedom Ride 1961. And if you're not familiar with this, this was back in 1961, and there was not supposed to be segregation. People were supposed to all live together happily, but that unfortunately was not happening. And in order to draw attention to that problem in our country, and also specifically the segregation that was happening on buses and in bus stations, there were 13 riders, and they were African American, and they were white, and they were female, and they were male, and they were young, and they were old. So a very diverse group of people. They took off on a bus, and again, just to bring attention to some of the issues in our country at that time. So it turned out to be extremely risky and dangerous. Someone purposely slit their tire so that they were stranded, and then they also had the bus set fire to. So this is also a pretty readable book, but it's a very intense topic of what has happened in our country in the past, and in some ways is continuing to happen in present day. The next book I have is The Miscalculations of Lightning Girl. In this story, our main character is Lucy. Lucy is a 7th grader, and she was struck by lightning, and as a result of that, became a math genius. So she lives with her grandmother. Her grandmother homeschools her. And in addition to having been struck by lightning, she also suffers from OCD, which, if you're not familiar with that acronym, it's obsessive compulsive disorder. So she is compulsed literally to do certain things. She has to sit up and stand and sit a number of times before she can finally sit. And it's okay as long as she's home with her grandmother, but her grandmother decides that she should go to school and meet the other kids and have some have that different opportunity. So Lucy's not too happy about this. She doesn't know what she's going to learn because she already knows all the math, and and she's also the new kid, just like the graphic novel that we talked about earlier. So lots of things going on in Lucy's life here, just adjusting. So that's the Miscalculations of Lightning Girl. Next is The Only Road by Alexandra Diaz. This book is this is realistic fiction. It's based on facts. The author has done a lot of research. This is a story of, similar to Stormy Seas that I talked about, of immigration from another country to the United States. In this story, Jaime is our main character, and he's with his cousin Angela, and they are leaving Guatemala. Guatemala is not a pleasant place for them at this time. There's a lot of gangs that are in control, and they try to force you into their gangs. And Jaime and Angela really want to escape and get a better education, so they decide to come to the U.S. And the thing that struck me the most with this story is one of the things that they have to do is jump onto a moving train. And I was just trying to imagine that. That's extremely dangerous. You have to be somewhat athletic to even be able to do that to begin with. And so I would say this is another very intense book. They don't have a lot of money. They have to rely on the kindness of strangers, and they get themselves into some dangerous predicaments. So that is The Only Road. Again, similar to Stormy Seas and Nowhere Boy that we just talked about. Next is Drum Roll, Please. This is realistic fiction. Our main character is Melly, and Melly is going to band camp for the first time. So she's a little nervous about going away for the first time, but the good news is her best friend Olivia is going with her, but it's for 2 weeks. It's kind of a long time, and she's adjusting to all of that, and then right before she leaves, her parents announce to her that they are divorcing. So now Melly is got even another concern, and she's a little nervous about that. So she goes off to band camp. Meanwhile, she and Olivia, she thinks they're going to spend a lot of time together, but they really don't, because Olivia is really into guys, and she's just into other things that Melly isn't really into. And so Melly is kind of trying to figure out her place, and she's making new friends, and then she realizes that she's actually more attracted to girls than to boys. So that is Drum Roll, Please. My next book is Sweep, the story of a girl and her monster. Now, even though it's got the word monster in the title, this is not a scary book. This is historical fiction. Sweep comes from the term chimney sweep, which we don't have them anymore, but back in the 1800s, you would have to have a chimney sweep come and literally sweep out your chimney and get rid of all that extra ashes in that. So our main character is Nan Sparrow. Nan has been raised by a man just called the Sweep. That's how she refers to him. At the beginning of the book, he is gone. She doesn't know what's happened to him, so she now has to work for another man who's not very nice by the name of Wilkie Crud. And the conditions are very bad. And at one point, she's up in a chimney doing the sweep, and a fire is started. Now, this could, in many cases, could lead to death. She is able to escape, but nobody knows that she's escaped. So she escapes into this attic, and in the attic is the monster. He is actually a golem, kind of like a monster made of soot. So he becomes her companion, and they try to eke out their existence, not working for Mr. Crud. So this is a little bit of a thicker book, and historical fiction, if that's what you're interested in. That's Sweep. Next is Small Spaces by Catherine Arden. So a lot of these books have been, not too scary elements. This book, if you're looking for scary, this is really scary. The book starts out kind of innocuously with Ollie, our main character. She sees a woman who's about ready to throw a book into a body of water. And she's like, yeah, you can't do that. And she grabs the book and runs away with it and starts reading it. And then the very next day, her class goes on a field trip, and the same woman in the book is now on her field trip. This is kind of weird. And then as they're coming back from their field trip, their bus breaks down. The bus driver seems a little odd. Their teacher leaves them all to go and get help. Meanwhile, her watch, which has been broken, the words "run" appear on it. And so she really doesn't know what to do. She decides to listen to her watch. She runs away with a couple of her friends, and then some really, really weird and scary things begin to happen. So I won't tell you anything more. If you like scary, this is the book for you. But I will tell you, you'll never quite look at a scarecrow in the same way again. I can't believe it. We're already to our last book. This is another young adult book. It's called Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. This is also a pretty intense book as far as the subject matter, which I'll get to in a minute. Reading-wise, it's written in verse. So if you haven't seen books like that, they're a little bit of a quicker read. Will is our main character in this story, and Will's brother has just been shot and killed. And Will is understandably extremely upset. But where Will lives, this is the rule. Number 1, no crying. Or crying, don't, no matter what. Number 2, snitching, don't, no matter what. Number 3, revenge, do, no matter what. So the first thing Will does is he grabs his brother's gun, sticks it in his pocket, hops on the elevator, and he's going to go and follow those rules. But what happens? People start entering. As he's going down every floor, someone comes on, and he doesn't think he knows them at first. And then he realizes every person coming onto the elevator is already dead. And they are there to talk to him. Not necessarily to give advice, but just maybe to point some things out to him. So you really don't know what's going to happen in this book, but it's a book that really makes you think. That is Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. Thank you so much for sticking with me. Those are all the books. I think it's a great group of books. There's a lot of different types of books, and hopefully there's something for everyone, and hopefully there's something for you. I love talking books, so if you ever see me at the library and you want to talk about them, I'll see you there. Thanks so much. Bye.